I declare the opening of the council members' briefing session at 6 o'clock today. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting today is being held on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city of Wanneroo. Please note that the audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online, with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of the meeting can be accessed live and on demand through the City of Wanneroo YouTube channel. Our attendances are as per the record, and I have no apologies or leave of absence this evening. I do note there's a councillor absent. Does anyone know if he is coming or not? He's an apology? Apology for Mr. Councillor Nguyen. This evening we will have the deputations, and then we will have the items that are relevant to the deputations, and then we will go straight to the staff matters, confidential item, closed doors, and then after we've finished with the confidential closed doors item, we will go back to the agenda proper. So deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members, unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members at the public item at item 7 in the order of business. I have 2 deputations confirmed this evening, and the first deputation is on item 4.4, consideration of development application for an amendment to DA 2018/736 Childcare Centre at 103 Greenvale Place, Bankshire Grove, DA 2022-1439, and the speaker is Constance O'Brien. Constance, would you like to come to the podium and give us your name and the suburb in which you live and bring your deputation? Thank you. Constance, can you turn your...
Not on.
Thank you.
I was told she might do it for me. No, good evening. My name is Constance O'Brien. I live at 88 Leasteer Drive, Marriagenup, 6078. And I'm here to speak against this reconsideration on the increase of numbers of children. And to begin with, I'd like to give you a brief history of Lake Adams. I refer to the Sunday Times, January 14, 1979. Lake Adams, the thoroughbred estate. The outstanding Lake Adams development is unique in Western Australia. Lake Adams is ideal for those people who enjoy horse riding. The estate has been developed with them in mind, with the inclusion of bridle paths past each lot, and there was a proposed equestrian complex. And I would also like to refer to the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan, because I think that's quite important considering what you are going to discuss tonight. The East Wanneroo Structure Plan, Precinct 9, is Lake Adams. It comprises of 1 to 2 hectare rural residential properties, many of which are used for equestrian purposes. The area includes a series of bridle trail reserves at the rear of lots and around parts of Lake Adams. The western portion, is that making a noise here? The western portion of Lake Adams is a conservation category wetland. There is no land use change proposed for this precinct. The original application for the childcare development was refused by council on the grounds of non-compliance with the local planning childcare centres, specifically the clauses location, road hierarchy, neighbouring uses, local amenity residential areas. The developer took this to the State Administrative Tribunal and mediation followed. Among other concessions, the number of children attending was reduced from 120 to 92 and the staff from 21 to 17. 2.5 years after opening, the childcare centre has applied for an increase in number of children to 130 and the staff to 21, plus extra parking bays, necessitating the removal of 4 semi-mature trees. This childcare centre should not have been given permission to locate in the said area initially. However, after mediation, the reconsideration was passed by council 7-4, with one councillor being recorded as saying it would cost $10,000 for the council to refuse. The childcare centre is now, after the gazetting of Amendment 180, a non-conforming development. This childcare centre has already been accorded by creative interpretation of special provisions for this area, that which is not afforded to any other property in the buffer zone where it is located, i.e. the ability to have an address in Greenville Place, access to their properties from Greenville Place, permission to remove trees and vegetation, permission to build more than one single dwelling meaning a house, and permission for multiple car parking. So the childcare centre has already got those things that no one else in that buffer zone has. What does council anticipate the childcare centre will request in another 2.5 years? I'd like to address the administration's comments in regard to the traffic impact statement prior to the approval of the Early Learning Centre in February 2019, among other matters. Is there not a more recent assessment after the fact? Why is there no assessment for Mornington Drive and Tumbleweed Drive, both of which access Greenvale Place by a much more direct route to the centre if coming from the south or west? Regardless of whichever route is taken, all traffic will eventually end up in Greenvale Place. As stated above, Lake Adams is a rural and equestrian state with bridle trails accessed from Greenvale Place. I object to the administration's comment on a submission re the increased risk to the safety of horses and their riders. The comment was, driver behaviour is not a valid planning consideration. A completely callous rejection of a valid fear and what would be expected as an amenity in a rural equestrian area. The residents who live here came for a lifestyle, not to flit in and out for a year or two, but for the duration. Not even a suggestion how this might be all alleviated with appropriate international signage or on how to pass a rider or slow speed signs. In reference to the lack of childcare that is mentioned, in Banksia Grove area there are 19 childcare centres are listed on the internet and some advertise vacancies. I seriously doubt the need for this particular facility to increase the number of children in care. With respect, I'd like to refer to the local planning policies for the development of childcare centres within the city. Objectives: number 1, to ensure childcare centres are located in an accessible and convenient location where it will not have a detrimental impact on the function and safety of the surrounding road network, minimises potential land use conflict and will not result in proliferation of on-street parking. Number 2, to ensure the development of childcare centres is site responsive, integrates with its context and is in keeping with the character of the locality. Development standards. 1, location. Childcare centres should ideally be located abutting and or adjacent to non-residential uses such as shopping centres, medical centres, schools, parks and community purpose buildings. My reading of the above would indicate that the childcare centre on Greenville Place complies with none of the above. Surely a non-conforming development completed cannot continue to obtain permission to ignore all the requirements of local planning policies to suit their proposed ongoing expansion. I would like to refer to the East Wanneroo District Strategy, which provides guidance needed for long-term development of the district and identifies place as a key consideration. I quote, "Critical to the success of this place-led approach is understanding local identity, unique characteristics, and a sense of place." Excuse me while I just turn this over. It's just sticking. As previously stated, Lake Adams has unique characteristics and a well-developed sense of place, and I trust that the above strategies and policies are not just hollow words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms O'Brien. Ms Director Dixon, would you like to respond to that deputation at all?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, I'll cover most of those points in my introduction to the item.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms O'Brien. I also have a second deputation there on the same item, 4.4, consideration of development of application for an amendment to DA 2018/736 Childcare Centre at 103 Greenville Place, Banksia Grove, DA 2022/1439, and the speaker is Bianca Sandri. Ms Sandri, would you like to just give us your name and the suburb in which you live? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. My name is Bianca Sandri from Urbanista Town Planning, located at 231 Bulwer Street in Perth. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant tonight in relation to item 4.4, the Childcare Centre addition at 103 Greenvale Place, Banksia Grove. For something different in front of this council, I'm speaking in support of the officer's recommendation and would firstly, by extension of my client, thank the officers for the recommendation and the detailed report. I am speaking on behalf of Tall Tree Learning and Atlantis Group. I have Bob Hindle here and also Rory representing both Atlantis Group and Tall Tree Learning. This evening I thought I would start with a bit of an overview of the business itself. My client started their first childcare centre here in the city of Wanneroo some 25 years ago. The business has grown and they now have 19 childcare centres across the Perth metropolitan region. They employ 350 employees, but something that's really important is that of those 350 employees, 225 of them are actually residents of the city of Wanneroo. The Atlantis Group, being the operator and my client, in 2016 won Business of the Year by the City of Wanneroo Business Association Awards, recognising their excellence across many different aspects. They also won Best Business for 15 employees and over in 2017. The current childcare centre is in high demand. There's no denying that. Locals find it convenient in location, but it provides an offering beyond what you would normally see in a childcare centre. It's on a 5,000 square metre site. It offers nature play and it offers that connection back to nature. In addition to the amazing nature play opportunities, they have a setting that which resonates with sustainability. They have chickens, guinea pigs, worm farms, composting, rainwater tanks, etc. All those things that we want our children to be able to play with, be able to learn about and be able to use as part of their life skills and fine motor skills. This really is an example of childcare facilities. On average, the childcare centre receives 40 new inquiries per month. 30 personalised tours are conducted every month. There are 134 active families enrolled. Doesn't mean each child gets to be able to go there, but they are enrolled. And they have 62 active families on their waiting list. And when I refer to active families, that means one or more children. So the waiting list is quite significant and there is a demand. All of those that are attending that childcare facility live within the City of Wanneroo. Given the uniqueness and the demand of the childcare centre, the application has been lodged to be able to extend the approval from 92 kids and 17 staff to 130 children and 21 staff. Noting, thank you, Madam Mayor, for picking up the officer recommendation. It should note that 21 staff is being sought for. An additional 6 car parking bays, so 30 through to 36, additional outdoor play to the east and a 1.8 metre high colorbond fence to the south. It should be noted that the 4 trees, the semi-mature trees noted, are 3 olive trees and 1 mango tree. They are not endemic to the area. The application does not propose any other extensions or alterations to the building itself. It is noted that the original application back in 2018 was initially recommended for approval and was refused, and yes, for 120 children. Subsequently, it was mediated and the approval was granted for 92 places. I understand the council's position in that aspect because often the reports that you receive as councils at that point are based on modelling as opposed to true data. So you don't genuinely know what the amenity impact is and you're trusting the data that's being modelled. However, since then, we now have the ability to ground truth the data and establish, will this have an amenity impact to the adjoining residents? And one of the test points is, has there been any complaints? And there have been no complaints for this facility since it's been operating in early 2021. The other 2 elements for consideration, and they've been detailed at length in the officers' reports, is the noise and the traffic. They're principally your 2 primary concerns in relation to a childcare facility. On page 114 of your agenda, the officers have helpfully dissected the technical reports in relation to noise. Ultimately, the city is happy with respect to noise based on the true data that has been collected on the operations of 92 children, that there will be no residual impact on amenity with respect to noise. The proposed increase in children will not impact upon the road network. In fact, if you look, I think it's on the same page, 114, it actually states that some of those roads are severely under capacity. So there's ample capacity for those roads, and we're only looking at providing another 150 vehicle trips per day for the additional children. And that was based on Viridian Drive, Turquoise Loop, Malachite Fairway and Greenvale Place. So both of those elements, in our view and the city's officers' views, have been dealt with. With respect to the ability to approve this addition in light of the current planning scheme and under the non-conforming use rights, your officers have provided a very detailed breakdown on pages 112 and 113 of your agenda. Ultimately, this council has the discretion to approve an addition to a non-conforming use. And this is because we are not seeking to change the use itself. We're not seeking to modify the building per se. We're just simply asking for additional children that do not impact upon the amenity of the area. It should be noted that the site, in terms of the existing built form, can never be sought to have additional kids after that. This is the maximum it can go based on the built form that is there currently. And that is because there are strict requirements under the childcare legislation in terms of square meterage for children, outdoor play versus indoor play. We asked the council to support the city's recommendation and approve the proposal. It truly is an outstanding childcare centre, and if you haven't been there, I'm sure my clients would be happy to take you through. It services the city of Wanneroo and its residents, and it needs to expand because of the wait lists that are there. And we feel that can be done so without impact to the adjoining residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Sandry. I think we'll go straight to item 4.4 now. Mr Dixon, would you like to speak to this item? Oh, Mr Bowring, are you speaking? Yes, please.
So thank you, Mayor and councillors, and good evening. I'll quickly go through this item. A number of the points I'm going to raise have been covered by the two deputies, but I think for emphasis and important, you get the views from administration. So as mentioned, this item 4.4 relates to a development application to amend the current approval for a childcare centre at 103 Greenvale Place in Banksia Grove, to increase the capacity from 92 children to 130 children, to increase the staff from 17 to 21, and increase the parking base from 30 to 36. There is an existing childcare centre on site which was approved by Council in May 2019 and has been in operation since February 2021, almost 2.5 years. This application is not proposing to increase the size of the existing building, which will remain the same. What is proposed is to allow a potential additional 38 children and 4 staff to use the existing premises and provide an additional 6 bays, as I mentioned previously. So from a planning perspective, the issue is whether the intensification proposed will detrimentally impact the amenity of the area. It's not to consider again the establishment of the use. So the application has been subject to public consultation. There were 12 submissions which we received, 7 objecting, 4 in support, and 1 providing comment, and a further 3 submissions in support were received after the advertising period closed. There were 5 main issues raised by objectors which are covered in the report. The first relates to the proposal being an extension to a non-conforming land use. In response to this issue, at the time the childcare centre was approved in 2019, it was a discretionary land use in the zone at that time. Council subsequently changed our district planning scheme through an amendment to make a childcare centre an ex-use, which is not capable of approval in that zone. But because the childcare centre has a valid development approval, it benefits from non-conforming use rights and therefore can continue to operate or be amended through a development approval. The second issue raised by objectors relates to noise. The applicant provided an acoustic report which concludes that the proposal will comply with the noise regulations, providing a 1.8 metre high fence is installed at the south-eastern corner of the site. The third relates to traffic. A traffic impact statement was submitted with the application, which concluded that there is capacity in the road network to accommodate the increased number of children and staff. And the third and fourth issues relate to parking and visual amenity. And the report indicates that this can be addressed comfortably within the proposed development. It's also noted that since the childcare premises opened in early 2021, the city has received no complaints in relation to the operation of the centre. Mayor and councillors, I would like to point out that there's an error in the report, in the recommendation on page 117. That recommendation 1B refers to 17 staff. It should actually refer to 21. We will make that change to the report prior to next week's council meeting. Mayor and councillors, I'm happy to answer any questions, noting that administration's recommendation is one of support for the application.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do I have any questions on this item at all? Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the Mayor to you, Mark, Mr Dixon, I should say. In a nutshell, from what you've told us, in terms of the usage issue, this is simply a case where there was a pre-existing valid non-conforming use which is continuing through time. Correct? And as such, every subsequent amendment to the town planning scheme cannot apply retrospectively, otherwise our town planning system would fall into a heap. Is that the case?
Mr Dixon?
Yes, and through you, Mayor. So yes, there is an existing childcare centre that was approved that now has established non-conforming use rights. As I mentioned, the zoning for this land has changed, so what is permissible within this zone has changed because of the amendment that was undertaken. So this childcare centre has approval, but there will not be an opportunity for other childcare centres within this buffer zone that exists between the land to the east and the suburban development to the west.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Baker, do you have another question?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Miles, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Mr Dixon, just a question just from my understanding. On page 115, you talk about the number of vehicles that, obviously the amount of people that are going to be placed there and the amount of trips. And it makes the point of saying that, the traffic report states it's 4 trips per child enrolled per day. I'm trying to understand how that would be possible because you're dropping off and then you're picking up. So I just wanted to understand how that is 4 trips a day.
Mr Dixon?
So that is an average, so that includes staff movement. So it's taken as an average that there would be 4 trips per day per child, but that can cover staff, it can cover deliveries and other movements to and from the childcare centre.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, Mayor. The other question I have is, we as a council are only giving approval for the centre to have up to the 130 young ones. It's still going to be up to the Department of Communities, I understand, to actually approve that increase.
Mr Dixon?
So what council is considering is the development application. What's covered by other legislation would still need to get approval from that relevant government department.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Deputy Mayor Treby.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. I just have one question I just want to get clarification on. And it's always good to welcome Ms Sandry from Urbanista to the largest local government by population in this state. Just thought I'd raise that. Just in terms of there being no complaints, and it was a very good point that was raised, does that there being no complaints on both planning and compliance grounds?
Mr Dixon?
So that is for both. So we've received no complaints with regard to the operation of the site since its opening in February 2021.
It was good. I just needed that vehicle to get the preface question in or comment.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for this item? Yes, Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My question relates to 1I, where the recommendation indicates an installation of a 1.8 metre fence. Is administration considering that there may be an increase in noise levels, and that is being put in as a preventative to make sure that noise levels aren't exceeded on the basis on the noise, the company that's doing the actual noise study?
Mr Dixon?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So if you refer to page 178 of your agenda, it does indicate that there's an additional outdoor play area at the south eastern corner of the site. So to address, through the noise report, to address any potential future noise that may be generated, I think the recommendation that the 1.8 metre high fence be installed in that location to ameliorate or reduce any potential impact on the adjacent property.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Is administration able to provide any guidance around what the current usage is on the surrounding site, so the land that's adjoining the premises? Because the deputation mentioned that there's no risk of further expansion because it would have reached the maximum amount of children that could be there under the current boundaries of the site. But say, for instance, is there a risk of the centre acquiring further land on either of the adjoining properties?
Mr Dixon?
No is the short answer to that, because of the amendment that was undertaken. So when this council first considered the original application, council eventually approved the application following SAT. One of the requirements of council at the time was to ensure that there couldn't be a proliferation of childcare centres on neighbouring lots, which on this particular zoned land, which acts as a buffer between the suburban development to the west and the essentially rural residential development to the east. And that amendment was successfully undertaken and approved by council and subsequently by the minister. So that ensures that childcare centre is an ex-use on the land adjacent to the north and south, and all of that strip that acts as a buffer. So there is no potential for the expansion of the centre beyond its current curtilage.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to check that under the modifications that are proposed from the original granting of what was given, are the operation hours staying the same, being 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, or is there any extension of the operation hours? Thank you.
Mr Dixon.
My understanding, Mayor, is that we're not proposing to change the hours of operation.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions on this item, thank you very much, and we'll return to the agenda proper. So, Mr Dixon, we've got Planning, Sustainability and Approval Services as the agenda proper that we go next. Oh, sorry, we're going behind closed doors. Yes, we are. Thank you. So, Mr Dixon, are you happy to go straight to questions on the items?
I am, Madam Mayor.
Okay, do I have any questions on item 4.1? Yes, councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have several questions. I just want to go through a couple of the items within it. My first, I guess, question is, and it may just be the way I'm reading it and understanding it, but we're sort of making a policy statement that unless, and this has always been one of my bugbears, unless we get a local developer contribution plan, we're not going to progress the applicant's application. That's the way I read it. Yet under, I think, Planning Policy 3.6, we're not allowed to hold up an application because we want a developer contribution scheme or plan or something like that. So how is that, without breaching the state planning policy, how are we going to work that through? Bear in mind this document saying we will not accept the application unless we have a local planning developer contribution scheme.
Mr Dixon.
So there's two elements, I think, to that question. One is in relation to local structure plans, and one is in relation to development applications that may be lodged. If there is a development application as an interim application, I think that's fine. But if there is a major development proposal that's looking to subdivide and develop lots, then that could be more of an issue because it could impact on the long-term, if you like, objectives in terms of the urbanisation of East Wanneroo. So what we're trying to articulate in the policies from a fairness and equity perspective, it's important that each development contributes towards future infrastructure. Because the implication of a certain development occurring without making development contributions, as we had with previous proposals that councils considered, then the shortfall in contributions that development doesn't make have to be made up from either the other landowners that are yet to develop or by council through municipal funds. So from an equity and fairness perspective, we think, administration thinks it's important that each development that occurs within East Wanneroo makes a fair and reasonable contribution towards future infrastructure in that area.
Councillor Miles.
Thanks, Mayor. I understand the theory behind it. The other part of it, I guess I'm a little conflicted with, is we're also being told by state planning that your precincts structure plan, your precinct plan is for 10 years. Does that mean the developer contribution scheme is only going to be for 10 years as well? What happens if there's excess money at the end of that 10 years? That is all the issues that I'm trying to come through, and I know you're probably still trying to work through that as well. So if we don't spend all the money within that 10 years on what we say we're going to spend it on, then what happens at the end after that 10 years? Because 10 years is not long when it comes to land development.
Mr Dixon.
So I understand that the District Developer Contributions Plan is currently being prepared by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage on behalf of the Commission. So we don't know at this point in time what the time frame is likely to be, but we do know that development in East Wanneroo is likely to be up to the next 40 or 50 years. So there is a possibility that the department will identify a developer contribution plan that extends beyond the 10-year time frame that's indicated in the state planning policy, given the size, magnitude and complexity of the East Wanneroo area. But we don't know at this stage. So that's hard for me to speculate, but I think it's important that, again, from a fairness and equity perspective, that each development that occurs makes a fair and reasonable contribution towards the infrastructure that they will be creating the need for.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. On to a new subject. I don't want to dwell on the DCPs. On page 7, on the actual policy proper, on one of the objectives, line 2, it says to enable the continued lawful use of the land in a manner that will not compromise the development in accordance with the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan. Can you just explain that one to me? So if somebody's got a horse farm, or they've got a mushroom farm, or they've got, you know, whatever, they can continue operating, but that's sort of then saying as long as it doesn't compromise the development under the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan. Is that how I'm reading that?
Mr Dixon.
So that's number 2 on the existing objectives that you're referring to, not what we're proposing to change. So I think what the intent behind that objective is to ensure that we enable existing established land uses to continue to operate, but what we don't do is increase or intensify the use of that land through further development approvals, which could compromise the long-term objectives and vision for the area.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Paul, Councillor Miles.
Thank you. Now, the other parts which and it's good policy, and obviously administration are going to tweak it as we see fit. But the other parts I'm not overly happy with, bearing in mind we're trying to do something unique in East Wanneroo. It's sort of it's known for its environmental goodness, the horse riding, as Miss O'Brien indicated today, with the bridle trails and that, and we're attempting to achieve that by putting in those parkland corridors. But when it comes to, I guess, the road infrastructure, if I go to the attachment 3, and we actually have a look at what we're sort of saying we want some of those roads to look like and have road reserves. We're talking about road reserves of up to 40 metres in some cases. That's actually a wider road reserve than Wanneroo Road. And we're saying that we want that in around the new town centre out there at Nangara. When you look at the actual plan, it doesn't look any different to a Joondalup or to a Yanchep or an Alkimos, just in the way that we're sort of suggesting the layout with paths and cycle shoulders, a couple of lanes for cars and the like. If you go to page 42 proper, that indicates that's 35 metres wide in total. Now that's saying that Lenore Road, Franklin Road, Sydney Road, Hawkins Road, Elliott Road, Badgerot Road and Lakeview Road are all going to be in a similar design as laid out in that bit of schematic. But it just looks like a normal town road. I thought we were trying to do something different and better.
Mr Dixon.
Thank you. It's a good question, but it's always a balance between trying to ensure the functionality of, you know, there's 50,000 dwellings, 150,000 residents. That's the size pretty much of the city of Joondalup at the moment. So there will be a lot of vehicle movements, and we have to ensure that the road network functions effectively. At the same time, what we do want to create, and it's mentioned in many occasions through the report and the policy, is that we want to create a tree canopy so that there is a continuous tree canopy which works from many, many reasons: aesthetics, urban heat island, encouraging people to walk and cycle. So we think that's really important, and that's why we've gone to the detail of specifying the cross-section so that we actually ensure that the road reserve is wide enough to accommodate as many trees as possible to create that sense of place. So it is a balance of acknowledging that there will be traffic and movement, and we want to ensure that's free-flowing and it doesn't cause congestion, but at the same time, we create a green corridor where there's opportunities for landscaping and tree planting, and that's part of the emphasis of why we've gone to the extent of drawing cross-sections, because livable neighbourhoods, as it stands, enables a multiple choice, if you like, of different cross sections depending on the road hierarchy. We've gone to the extent and trouble of identifying what we want for each of these major roads so we get that uniformity. If you look at, and this is no criticism to Marmion Avenue, but you get with Marmion Avenue, you get a whole range of different tree species and types, and the character that we want to create in East Wanneroo is you know you're in East Wanneroo because, and that is partly achieved through uniformity and quality of landscaping within that area. These plans will help us achieve that.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Savitton, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My question is to do with the developer contributions. Has sufficient communication with the Department of Planning been made to ensure that there is the unity between the Department of Planning's planning methods and our developer contributions to ensure that we will be receive those in order to perform our duty as a council and provide the things necessary for the subdivision of East Wanneroo?
Mr Dixon?
So the district developer contributions plan is being prepared by consultants on behalf of the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and the Commission. We've had some informal liaison with the department as part of that preparation, but not formal, if you like. So what will happen is once they've concluded the preparation of that draft document, that will be submitted to the city, and the city will then consider that as part of a scheme amendment to embed the developer contributions plan into our scheme in the same way that all of your existing developer contribution plans are adopted by council and embedded into your scheme. That's something that will happen, we anticipate, towards the middle, if not towards the end, the third quarter of this year. So we're still to receive that. We don't know what the content of that is going to be at this stage, but that will be for council to consider at that point in time. I think we'll need to ensure that it complies with State Planning Policy 3.6, but equally it achieves all of council's objectives and aspirations for the East Wanneroo area.
Really,
Thank you, Mr Dixon.
sorry,
Councillor Savitton, do you have another question?
Yeah, I'd hate to be left in the similar situation as Cape Horn Road, but my next question is to do with DPS 3. Now, I know the city is working on that to make sure that we can streamline all our planning policies and our regulations under Town Planning Scheme number 3. And this is, I guess, a fairly long winded type question in terms of time, and this will be determined by the Department of Planning. But how long would you envisage putting a time on, if you can, the marrying of DPS 2 into the new Town Planning Scheme 3 and streamlining all of these conditions and in fact simplifying the East Wanneroo area in terms of the new Town Planning Scheme?
Mr Dixon?
Through you, Mayor, so the development of East Wanneroo isn't contingent on having a new Scheme 3 in place. You've got a local planning strategy that provides that high-level vision through the various documents that Council supported, the District Sense of Place Statement, which is part of this policy, through this local planning policy and through comments that you've made on the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan. I think you've set the framework in terms of your aspirations. So the new scheme isn't contingent, I feel like, or development in East Wanneroo isn't contingent on having a new scheme in place.
One last question.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Savitton.
Yeah, and the last question is to do with the actual tree canopy, and of course that's the flavour of the current times that we're going through, and I certainly like the clause that actually implements the urban forest within this particular area, and the perception that we will have good tree cover over parkways and roads, etc., etc. But the question is to do with the bush forever, because there are certain pockets of bush forever in there which landowners will have no control over. Is the city's position going to be to make sure that those pockets remain untouched? And I'm not sure how the owners or developers will be compensated in that form, but as long as they're untouched, so that we can maintain the tree canopy philosophy.
Mr Dixon?
So through you, Mayor, so existing areas identified as bush forever won't be subject to urbanisation. There will be other areas that are identified as part of the future urbanisation of East Wanneroo, which will be retained for their conservation values, and that work will be, it's already identified through the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan, but will be further refined when local structure plans are submitted for the city's consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. I have two questions on this agenda item. The first one is on page 42, which was the diagrams of the roads. Currently, at the moment, in terms of the road reserve, one of the e-rideable rules at the moment is that on roads that are 50 kilometres or less, we can use e-ridables. So if there were future roads in East Wanneroo or any road that applies now, would e-scooters be applicable to the cycle lane / shoulder? And does that mean they're not allowed to use shared paths? Is that a city policy that we have, or do we have any position on this at the moment?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, I might refer to the Director of Assets to see if he's got a response for that.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That's my understanding. The e-scooters are only allowed on the footpath and dual-use paths at the moment, and that until state government legislation changes, that will be the case.
Thank you. And do you have another question, Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. My second question is on page 24. It was just in relation to the structure plans. I see that one of the documentations that is not on the list is environmental. Is that a way that we can implement something to add that in as a required, regardless of the precinct it's in, to include an environmental management plan? Because at the moment you've got water, bushfire, but no environmental.
Mr Dixon.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I will take that question on board and review that in anticipation of next week's council meeting to see if any further changes are required.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. Yes, question to Mr Dixon. It relates to the tree canopy issue. I refer to page 12 of the report, in particular paragraph 6, new paragraph 6, which is to be inserted as part of this review. It makes reference in that paragraph, of course, as to the intention to provide a continuous tree canopy of shade over footpaths on both sides of streets. It refers to the minimum standards as well. It goes on to say, however, even though these standards do apply, in the event that they conflict with the WAPC's Livable Neighbourhoods operational policy, then the provisions of simply the policy shall prevail. Now, does the policy mean our policy or the WAP policy? I assume it's the WAP policy because that's a superior body, so to speak.
Mr Dixon.
I hope they wouldn't override that particular requirement, by the way.
I think the intent is that our policy will prevail because that's the whole intent of this document. Is with livable neighbourhoods, as I mentioned previously, there's a range of options that a developer can choose. So for different types of roads, there are different options that they can choose in terms of the reserve width. What we found is that as development has taken place over many decades, that a lot of the road reserve widths have been narrowed so that there isn't sufficient room to accommodate street trees that will survive and thrive. So the intent with this policy is to try and mandate, it's still in accordance with livable neighbours, but we're specifying exactly what we want to try and achieve within East Wanneroo, and that is primarily to ensure that the reserve widths are wide enough so that trees can be planted on both sides. So I think when we can make that clearer in terms of the policy that we're referring to, this local planning policy and not the livable neighbours operational policy, because otherwise we default to the existing position, which is to allow a multiplicity of different options.
Councillor Baker.
Just one more micro, please, Madam Mayor. I think you would agree that that's part of the problem with a lot of the small block subdivisions we see throughout Alkmaar, whereby we all talk about the need for trees on verges, on council verges, and on median strips, but the verges are so narrow, it'd be, in effect, you'd be creating a rod for your back if you planted a gum tree, because it would forever be requiring maintenance and ultimately would be removed. So certainly having a wider verge certainly enhances the growth of trees, of course, and produces more shade. Thanks.
Councillor
Sorry, the
Baker, would
question
you
was, do you
say,
agree?
don't you agree?
I beg your pardon.
Mr
There's a leading
Dixon.
question when the question was actually...
Mr Dixon.
I do agree.
I agree that you agree.
Thank you.
I think we have an
Councillor
agreement.
Huntley, you have a question?
I do, thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got three questions. The first question I was going to ask you is, these roads now are going to be extremely wide to accommodate this, which is going to take up a lot of the green area that we have to get these roads on, because we're trying to put some canopy in these roads. Now, when you've got a POS and you've got a roadway coming through that POS, so you've now divided the POS from each side, you actually show a diagram, and there's cycle lanes, walkways, dual carriageway straight through the middle, and a central reserve. That means when you come to the edge of a park, you've got to cross or navigate this huge road, and we haven't put any provision for subways or bridges or anything, so that the trails that we're trying to get from one end of East Wanneroo to the other, across those trails, you're going to meet these huge roads. Are we going to make provision that we go under or over them so that people can continuously move without having to stop and risk life and limb to cross these roads, especially if we're bringing in light railway?
Mr Dixon.
I think, just to be clear, there are obviously major roads, the main distributor roads through the development, and they're provided with a central median or refuge to enable crossing, but they're not the typical roads that will be delivered in East Wanneroo. They're the high order roads that will accommodate a lot of the movement in and out of East Wanneroo. I think the areas where there is public open space, more broadly, they're provided on one side of a road, not across both. But there may be some instances where perhaps there is a lake system on one side, and then there's a road, and then there may be a public open space on the other. As part of that, we will need to ensure that there is adequate opportunity for people to cross safely. I don't think, from experience, what we will be promoting is to go underneath a road. The experience we've had elsewhere in the city is that they don't work. People don't choose to use them because they don't perceive them to be safe. And overpasses are expensive, so the design of the street is particularly important to enable people to cross safely, and that's something we work with our engineering team to make sure that we get the design right, so there's crossing points which are safe.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. Just as a supplementary to that, you say subways aren't safe, but they haven't been safe in the past because we haven't had CCTV cameras, we haven't had smart cities. Those are going to be introduced into here. There is actually a subway, yes, it is a bit of a nightmare, but it's not that bad, which crosses from Joondalup Drive into Horton Park, and that subway actually works pretty well. There's a few smashed bottles that go on there at night, but it's actually not too bad. It's well lit, and people do use that. And I've only, in my whole 4 years here, have only had 2 complaints on that underpass. So that's actually worked very, very well. And I do think we've not explored it at all. It's not in here. But just as another question.
So Mr Dixon can answer that question. Was that a statement or a question?
Well, it was a question that perhaps we should actually have some provision that it's in here. The developers don't have to use it, but if it's in here, it's an idea that maybe they could certainly look at.
Mr Dixon, would you like to comment on that, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So what this document, it doesn't preclude the opportunity for underpasses to be provided. What we're looking at is a cross-section, typically because we have to provide a certain level of detail, but you don't want to go into too much detail that it becomes too prescriptive. So That's not to say that that couldn't be considered in certain locations as part of the local structure planning that still needs to be undertaken. It's just not something that we would include in a policy document of this nature, which is really just identifying, the key elements of the public realm. As I mentioned before, the underpasses were identified, I think, in Butler Ridgewood, and there was developer contributions collected. But over time, I think the experience that administration has had is that those underpasses, when they are delivered, have not been utilised. Whether that's the design, whether that's reflecting latest technology, I think is a question that council can consider at a subsequent stage. But the experience of administration up to this point in the city of Wanneroo is typically residents choose not to use them and they go at grade as a basis. But that's not to say we couldn't introduce some in some key locations.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Huntley, you have another question?
I do. So my second question is, you actually, on page 57, have provided a diagram of laneways and to actually extend those laneways. Now, I do believe, if you could just clarify, that these laneways are the ones that are for the rear garages. So they actually have to build a road at the front and then put these laneways in at the back. And then we have those shocking problems of we don't have enough curb or frontage to actually put the curb lines in without cars managing to stay off the pavement line and then excessively or get tickets for parking on the either on the verge or over the pedestrian walkway.
Councillor Huntley, which page was that you were referring
So that's on page 57.
Thank you.
I was quite surprised to find this still in here. I was hoping that we would actually get rid of those laneways and actually discourage the developers from using them in the future.
Mr Dixon?
So laneways are still permitted on livable neighbourhoods. I think what administration is trying to point out here is that some of those laneways are unattractive, that the ones that have already been built and established in certain of our suburbs. So what we wanted to try and introduce is some greening element into the laneway, and so typically a laneway could be 6 metres wide, which is really just enough room for cars to come and go, and also refuse vehicles, although our refuse drivers do complain that they're not wide enough. The primary objective by increasing the laneway widths to 8 metres is to allow an opportunity for trees to be planted on both sides. It softens the visual impact. It also provides a bit more space for our refuse trucks to get up and down to pick up the rubbish bins. We can't not cater for them at this stage. In discussing this with Mr Barrowing earlier today, I think what we have noticed in more recent subdivisions is they're becoming less popular over time, which is something which I think overall is a good outcome because I don't think at the moment they're creating attractive environments. And also from a development perspective, they're having to construct 2 roads as opposed to just one road to service lots. So I can imagine over time that laneways will diminish, but for those that do want to provide laneways, this is a mechanism for us to ensure we get landscaped, more attractive real laneways than we currently have.
All right, well,
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Wright, do you have a question?
Madam Mayor, I've just got another question.
You've got another question?
Yeah.
I thought you'd already asked 3, sorry. Go with your 4th one.
Yeah. So my third question is, if we have a look at the recommendation, it does actually say here that we next week will be adopting this policy and we are going to advertise it, but the public then don't get a chance to comment on this. Is that correct, or do they?
Mr Dixon?
Through you, Mayor, on page 6 of the report, what it does under 1, it just says resolves to adopt the policy for the purposes of advertising. So the intent is that the policy plus the attachments will go out for consultation. We'll then receive hopefully some informed comments and then we'll bring those back to you for your formal adoption of the policy.
That's great. So the public do get a right to reply. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I just had one question that came up in regards to pedestrian overpasses. Do we have any policies or criteria around road networks that carry a certain amount of vehicle traffic that may require a pedestrian overpass? So, for example, Wanneroo Road, Lenore, Badgerup, Ocean Reef, which are all deemed to be dual carriageways in the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan.
Mr Dixon.
So the roads you've referred to are typically controlled by main roads. I'm not aware of a policy that mandates the requirement for overpasses. Typically, what happens is at-grade crossings are provided, pedestrian or otherwise, or traffic signals, and that's the opportunity where I think most people would take the opportunity to cross. But I may defer to the Director of Assets just to confirm that there is no formal policy.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. I think as explained by Mr. Dixon, I don't think there is a policy which defines the minimum criteria. It is a needs basis infrastructure. Most of the crossing points are at the major intersections where there is a controlled intersection, whether by way of signals or any other traffic treatment like roundabouts.
Thank you. Councillor Svitten. I'll come back to you. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a question with regards to the East Wanneroo Committee. Will any of the information in this report be brought to the committee for comment, etc.? Mark?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, so that the East Wanneroo Community Reference Group, I think that the terms of reference is quite clear. So the District Centre Place Statement was referred to that group and they provided a recommendation which is on page 3 of your report, which is one of support for the District Centre Place Statement. So the policy itself isn't something that we would take to that community reference group, but certainly the District Centre Place is something that we take to that group.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Wright, you're fine. Okay, any other questions? Councillor Miles.
Just to pick up on what Councillor Svitten was asking there, bearing in mind we do have several people obviously from the area, can you make sure then when this does go up for, I guess, public consultation on the MySay website, that they all get access or an email to say that it's going up on that? Because I think that's only fair that they get to comment and not just it goes up and nobody sees it. Just to follow on from another question, Mayor, on page 57 to Councillor Huntley, talking about the laneway reserves. And I do understand, you know, I've had laneways. They sometimes work, they sometimes don't work. In this pictorial, you're looking at wanting a tree and you're sort of putting a metre buffer at the side, both sides, to obviously be able to plant a tree or plant something that will maybe grow higher. But in laneways, everyone, or the several houses I've had, they've all been zero lot. So the garage is literally right on that edge of the tarmac or the bitumen. So I'm not sure how we get to grow a tree, because usually the houses are edge to edge and right onto the zero lot as well. Because when I then looked at the tree on page 61 and on, which I thought was very good, the tree species, it does say on that very first page, 61, that you've got minimum setbacks. And I think that's a good idea because we know the damage that trees can cause to our assets. So you've got there from that very first one, it says a 1 metre from curb. So I'm not sure how the tree schedule is going to fit with the idea of doing that laneway design. Do you want to comment on that at all or just take it on note?
Mr Dixon.
I would love to comment on that, thank you. I'm not a tree expert, but there are tree barrier control mechanisms that can be used to ensure that the roots and the type of tree that is chosen is a tree that isn't going to be invasive and cause problems to adjacent buildings or infrastructure. Having said that, I take the point that you've made on board and I'll look to perhaps provide some further clarification in terms of page 61 and what that means in terms of rear laneways.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Miles, another
Thank you,
question.
Mayor. And I know it seems tedious asking all the questions, but this is a very big policy for East Wanneroo. On the tree species, and I'm definitely no gardener, you only have to look at my grass to see that, but it's got obviously the species there, the common names, as well as the botanical names, and where they're from, whether it be Brazil or Madagascar, where they come from originally. But I was interested in the irrigation schedule, more to the point. And if you look at just on page 62, you've got the jacaranda, as it's commonly known, and it says it's a native of Brazil, but it's got an irrigation of 4, which if you then go to page 61, that means it's going to require irrigation all the time. We don't allow that in our suburbs. So I'm just trying to correlate how we're going to do that and still keep a tree alive that needs that extensive irrigation.
Mr Dixon.
So again, I'm no expert either in terms of tree species, but this has been extensively worked with by both members of the assets team as well as the city's planning directorate. So the trees have been carefully selected. Some of them will require more irrigation than others. I think that's accepted. What it does refer to is irrigation during the summer months, and there are certain instances where it may be reasonable for us to irrigate limited irrigation during summer months. If council doesn't want that to happen, if you want to just choose species that require minimum irrigation, then that's something that you can guide us on through the policy. But as it stands at the moment, we've tried and extensively liaised and consulted on the range of species to create those opportunities for diversity, but also canopy cover and so on. It's a balanced approach. So, but if council's view is you want something different, then obviously we'll reflect that in the policy.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. And Councillor Wright, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I remembered my other question. It was just in regards on page 63, I just noticed, and I have brought this to the attention of the CEO and a few other people, in regards to the use of bottle brushes. Is that something we can have look to remove? Because I know I know for me, I get a lot of complaints about bottle brushes and the amount of mess and obviously health issues with, you know, not pollution, sorry, what's the other word? Pollination, those sorts of things. So is that something we can look to substitute that species going forward for any development within the city?
Mr Dixon.
I'll take that question on notice and refer to our tree experts in terms of whether they're retained or not.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Any other questions on this item? Deputy Mayor Treby.
Just further to that last question, could you also please see if you can arrange to get an arborist to provide a list of trees that don't require pollination for survival?
Any other questions? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've just got one more question on the trees. Can we, so that list is absolutely fabulous. It's a fantastic list, and I think it's really nice to actually see a list of trees that are coming out. But can we actually make sure that that list is for the streets and for the road reserves? It's actually not for the parks. So parks will have the ability to have jarras and other bird type food sources and our wildlife food sources in the parks, rather than have those trees on the verges where we're encouraging animals to get close to traffic. So that would be wonderful if that was actually incorporated in to show the public that there is another stage of trees going to occur as well.
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, this schedule is just for the roads. It's not for public open space, and I think hopefully that's clear in terms of where we've got a subtitle for the different types of road. It isn't talking about open spaces, which will be subject to a different assessment process.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll move to item 4.2. Do we have any questions on item 4.2? Councillor Miles.
Just if the director could just explain the reasoning of Amendment 204. It seems like a lot of work for one single block in that area.
Mr Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a simple matter to explain. We're really just cleaning up the different, the ASP5 has been in place for a while. A lot of developments occurred in the area, but we've just got a mismatch between what's in ASP5 and what's in DPS2. So by bringing the zonings across into District Planning Scheme 2, we just provide a bit more certainty around those zones and not relying on ASP5. So this is part of our sort of our normalisation of our structure plans and just bringing those old structure plan provisions across where they've already served their purpose primarily. So it really is just a bit of housekeeping. Not sure if there's any other way to put that.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. A question is it expected that the amendment will not have any adverse impacts on the 4 undeveloped lots?
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. No, the development potential of those lots won't change. They'll remain as they are currently.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we move to item 4.3. Do I have any questions on item 4.3? Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question. Because the report refers to the fact that subdivision is now complete in the Amble estate, this Hainsworth structure plan, is administration able to clarify whether the public open space, the responsibility of that has now transferred over entirely to the city? I believe it has, but perhaps for next week, can we clarify whether that is the case?
Mr Dixon.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, we'll certainly clarify that prior to next week's meeting.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we go to assets, item 4.5. Would you like to speak to any items?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't intend to speak on any of the items, but happy to take any questions on both.
Okay, do we have any questions on item 4.5? Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. I've got many. Hold on, guys and girls. I've got lots. Was there any petitioners notified that this item is on the agenda tonight?
Mr Singh?
Yes, Mayor, they were. Yeah.
Councillor Coetzee, do you have another question?
Yes. The new section of Marmion Avenue is basically done. Only a bit needs to still be constructed, which is from the big roundabout at Yanchia Beach Road to the start of the end of Splendid Park. Do we have any time when this will be finished, and when will this be open and open to the public for use?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. I need to get that on notice. I need to clarify with our land development team and provide that information in the briefing notes.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee?
Yes, please. On page 187, it says waiting for subdivisions to be fully developed and occupied also allows for all potential residents in the area to comment on any proposals that rather than only existing residents. How far off do we think, year-wise, would it be before the subdivisions are fully developed and occupied in this specific area?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can draw council members' attention to page 193, there are the new connections to the extended Marmion Avenue being built. I think 3 of them have been built. The one which is still under construction and will be then further extended westward will be Templetonia Boulevard, and there is a development around it. And my understanding is there is a commercial development and also some residential development on that. Again, the understanding is subdivision has been approved, but we don't have timelines on when that will be constructed. So it's kind of unknown in a sense, like when the area will be reaching to a potential where we can establish, yes, area is now established, traffic patterns are now embedded, which then helps us to identify if there is any need for any traffic treatments in that area.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee, you have another question?
It's a follow-up on that one. Do you agree then it's going to be a couple of years away?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, yes, that could be a assumption, but we don't know it. It's all dependent upon the developers' timelines.
Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. Did anybody of administration make contact with the main petitioner, Mr. Toro, who was working on this petition on behalf of all the residents in that area? And was any questions asked upon this problem?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, when this, we did advise the lead petitioner last week of this report coming to council briefing session tonight. And also we addressed the questions which they have in the covering email to the petition in the report. So they didn't ask any specifically during that recent advice to them, but we have addressed the question they have asked in the report.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. In page 188, the score 23 under the LATMP. Where should the score be for it to be justified?
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Under the existing local area traffic management policy, the scores above 60, they get then listed in the capital works program for the provision of traffic treatments. So 23 is kind of a way off from that score.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. Again, on page 188, it says administration has not undertaken any new traffic counts on Beachside Parade as the extension of Marvin Avenue and Yanchep Rail Station is still under construction. So this tells me that there was a traffic count taken at some stage. And if so, how long ago and what was the count?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, I need to take that on notice and provide that information in the briefing notes. My understanding is that was prior to the similar report which was done late last year. So those traffic counts were done before that. The reason we have not done traffic counts as per the council's previous decision at October council meeting, October 22 council meeting, it was decided that we will undertake further traffic counts once the road network is complete and traffic patterns are established. Primarily, the connection to Yanchep train station via Templetonia Boulevard is completed. That is yet to occur, and that's the reason we haven't done any traffic counts.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. On page 192, it was attachment number 2. On the side of it, you can't really see what those, all the signals and images means on the map itself. Could that please be resent to us?
Mr Singh.
Yes, Mayor, I'll definitely circulate that again. We'll update the attachment and also put that on the hub.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee, you have another question?
Yep, 3 more.
3 more.
On page 188, there's a left-in, left-out access that are provided for Barra Road and Lindsay Beach Boulevard, and full movement access is provided for Zambia Rise. I do understand that the train station and the subdivision are not fully developed yet, but the area is going to become a very busy area. So my question is, on Marmion Road and Shorehaven Boulevard, there was a problem with those residents to turn right to get onto Marmion Road. And then council made an amendment to the road, an add-on, like a slipway for the roads to get on easier. Was this done, or was this designed or anything that the new piece of the Marmion Avenue will have that as well? Because I know that the, what is that road? It's the one that the developers is now actually going to build a roundabout as well. Templetonia. I know that Templetonia is on the way, but also most probably a couple of years away. I just want to know is there anything like a slipstream installed for that residence?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, the Marmin Avenue extension is being built by the developer as part of their requirements for the subdivisions. So they have provided what their requirements are. So that's how they've designed and constructed it based on the previous approvals in the structure plan and the like. And once the roundabout at Templetonia is constructed and connected to the subdivision, that should provide a safer access to the subdivision to that area. Regarding the Marmin Avenue at Shorehaven, the Marmin Avenue is actually providing connection from both sides, east and west, whereas in here, the subdivision potentially has another access from Two Rocks Road as well. So depending on, again, once network is fully complete, then traffic patterns will establish, then the need for any further infrastructure can be determined. But at this stage, developers have designed and constructed in accordance with the subdivisional requirements.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. Do we have any data of any accidents that happened on Beachside Parade?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, we'll definitely get the data from main roads for last 5 years. All the crash data gets uploaded through main roads website, all the reported crash data. So we'll actually get that information and I can provide that.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. Last question. This is a very funny question. Have the city or can the city ask the relevant authorities to have a speed camera installed from time to time on specific places, roads or wherever?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, under the local area traffic management policy, the general provisions are that if the score is between 30 and 60, we do provide traffic data to WA Police and request them for further enforcement, monitoring and enforcement. At 23, generally not, but if that's what Council wants us to do, we can definitely write to WA Police, provide the traffic data and request further monitoring and enforcement.
Councillor Coetzee.
One more thing. I would like to foreshadow an amendment for this, please.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. Yes, to Mr Singh. Just continuing on from what Councillor Coetzee has raised, I can understand the rationale of not bothering to do another traffic count until such time as the major roadworks within the area have been completed. I can understand that. But of course, at this point in time, we don't know when Marmion Avenue will be fully extended. We don't know whether or not it will include a part of the proposed Tory Pango Avenue, and we don't know when Templetonia Boulevard will be completed. But we do know, apparently, that the Mitchell Freeway is opening on the extension's opening on the 9th of July, and the train line will be opening later this year. So on the basis that the Antrim train station is in fact open on or before the end of December this year, people who, I think you'd agree, most people who would use Marmion Avenue in that area would probably want to travel to the train station, and to do that, that they would have to get onto Marmion Avenue. So until such time as Marmion Avenue has been, the extension's been completed and Templetonia Boulevard has also been constructed, there'll only be, in fact, two ways of, well, only one way of getting there. In terms of getting onto the Marmion Avenue, there'll be Zamia Rise. I think you'd agree with that. The next street would be Lindsay Beach Boulevard. And beyond that, the person concerned would then have to turn left at Yantra Beach Road and travel to the connecting road to the train station. So during this long intervening period, that's the rat run, so to speak, that many people will take, unless they've got a four-wheel drive and they want to pretend they're one of the Leyland brothers and go across country. So having said that, given the time delays and the most likely destination of traffic in this area to the train station and the trip home, subject to the car parking over there at the train station, isn't it more realistic to bring forward, so to speak, the traffic counts now and then do a traffic count in, say, 2 years' time when that road network has been finalised? Then you can conduct a proper comparative analysis to get a good insight into what rat run, so to speak, people have developed for themselves based on their assessment of how long it takes to get to and from the train station and Yantra Beach Road through to Wanneroo Road. Thanks.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll check when the traffic counts were undertaken last. If road network hasn't changed since then, I don't see a merit in doing traffic counts at this point in time. However, we do see a merit in getting traffic counts done once the connection to train station is live at that point in time. So if we've done the traffic counts in last year or so, then we can assume that data to be still relevant, and then we don't need to do any further traffic counts. If data is 2 or 3 years old, then yes, we can schedule one.
Thank you, Mr Singh. I do understand that there's a lot of speeding down the road down there, particularly with the school nearby and the little commercial centre there. And I suppose we need to be vigilant when we've got children crossing those roads. Councillor Baker, do you have another
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Of course, I think, as you'd agreed, Mr Singh, the length of the carriageway of the beachside parade that is the subject of the petition is that length depicted in attachment 1. My question is this: let's assume the Mitchell Freeway extension is open and train station is open in December this year. If the person lives in Byara Road, referring to that street in the top of attachment 3, how do they travel in a car to park at the train station? How do they get there?
Mr
How
Singh.
will they get there, other than do a huge loop-the-loop, so to speak? In other words, well, you could, putting aside this silly example of a four-wheel drive going cross-country, of course, obviously, and jumping a fence, something like that.
Mr Singh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I think they will have to use a local network rather than me trying to work out what preference everybody will take. It becomes a personal preference when you leave your property, which road you're going to use to get to a destination point. So I think whatever will be available road network, that's traffic. Driving on the roads is a habit. People will try 2 or 3 different routes and then develop a habit to see what they're comfortable with. And that will be the traffic patterns which will establish. So it's very difficult for us to predict here what route certain people who live in certain properties will take. Everybody will kind of make their own decision in that respect.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on that item? Yes, Deputy Mayor Treby.
Just one question, and I just note, and it was on the Wanneroo RAP that was number 19 of 23, and that refers to the extension of the Mitchell Freeway. Is it true, and I'll probably ask the CEO this, is it true that that information was provided in confidence to the city?
Mr Sims.
For you, Madam Mayor, I may need to take that on notice because I'll need to actually refer to the RAP edition that Deputy Mayor Councillor Treby is referring to, and whether there was a notation within that information was confidential.
If I can.
Thank you, Mr Sim. Deputy Mayor Treby.
Just reading directly from it, and that might provide clarity. And I read, Main Roads WA has provided an early in-confidence advice about that data. That would be taken to be in confidence, I would imagine.
Mr CEO.
That would be my understanding of that statement as read, but I think Mr Singh wishes to add an additional comment.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. The advice from Main Roads, general advice from Main Roads is the freeway is likely to be open to public mid-2023. We have received some in-confidence advice at this stage. It is not yet to be released to public when it's likely to happen. So that information we're still awaiting from Main Roads for a confirmation, what date that will be. Once that's available, we'll provide that to council members, and then I think Main Road will also release that to public. Through Mayor, can I just make a comment on the earlier observations here?
Yes, Mr Singh.
Freeway is being, thank you. The freeway is going to be extended only up to Romeo Road at this stage, which is way further down from Yanchep. The traffic pattern in the roads in and around Beachside Promenade is likely to change once train station is open. That's likely to happen, I think, sometime in 2024.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on this item? There are no more questions on this item. We go to item 4.6, response to petition 010323. Are there any questions to this item? There are no questions to this item. We now go to corporate strategy and performance. Thank you, Mr Singh. Ms Jennings, would you like to speak to any of the items under corporate strategy and performance tonight?
Thank you, Mayor. In general, no, but I did want to flag that item 4.9, we were trying to line up with the delegation's report, which is in the CEO's area. I think that's 4.11 or 12.
4.12.
12. But what we'll do is make a slight change to 4.9 to add another recommendation to recommend adoption of the delegation so that we don't get ourselves mixed up with the order of the reports. So there will be that minor change that will occur, but I don't have anything else to present.
Thank you. Do I have any questions to item 4.7? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just I guess my annualised general question to Ms Jennings and her extensive team. And I know council sometimes is like, you know, turning a Panamax cargo tanker. It can take a long time sometimes for decisions and policies to come about. But I note we are still doing bonds and refunds for crossovers and curbs. I thought when I asked the question last year, the administration was working to eliminate that process and allow it to be a condition of development application.
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll have to pass that over to the Director of Assets, I'm afraid.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. At this point in time, we do collecting the verge bonds to ensure our road verge infrastructure like footpath, curbs, drainage, etc., is protected during the construction of the dwellings in our new areas. So that process is working well and it's continuing at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I just was under the impression, Mayor, that we were working to, like a lot of the other councils, to eliminate bonds because of the administrative time it takes to obviously process the bonds, placing it in an area that can be managed, and then obviously when the bond needs to be refunded, there's another process there again, and that all adds to a cost. That's why I bring it up again. I also, on the same subject, on page 208, it's got Banksia Grove bond refunds, almost $400,000. Now, I'm assuming that the Banksia Grove Development Company there, nominees, had to play bonds for, I guess, doing parks and other incidentals. Can I then ask administration, how much money did we then hold back because they didn't deliver as per why the bond was actually placed?
Mr Dixon can answer the bond one.
Mr Dixon, if you can answer the bond one, and then the first part of the question, the CEO will respond to that. So I might let the CEO respond to the first part of the question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Councillor Miles's recollection is correct. We have been for some time reviewing the effectiveness of bond collection as a principle, and we'll shortly be presenting a paper to a council forum which includes referencing other local government's practices and also the asset risk profile of collecting and not collecting bonds, and a recommendation in regards to bonds, fees and charges and management.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Mr Dixon, could you please respond to the second part of Councillor Miles' question?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So, in some instances, developers seek to get early clearance of their subdivision conditions for typically construction of new roads or drainage infrastructure, and I think that was the case in the case of Banksia Grove nominees. The city receives a bond just in case they don't then deliver on their promise to deliver the infrastructure as an early clearance has occurred. Typically what happens is the developer then delivers the infrastructure and then we provide the bond back to the developer once we're satisfied that they've cleared all of the required conditions of their subdivision approval.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Are there any other questions? Oh, Ms Jennings, do you want to respond to that as well?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to respond so much to that, as I've just remembered another fix that we have to do to the warrant payments. So on page 200, down near the bottom of the page, there's a number of cancelled items. So they're cancelled cheques. They should all have 0 next to them. So that will be fixed up. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Are there any other questions? Yes, councillor Berry.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to know what CS Legal Court Fees Rating Services are, because we've spent 207,000 over 5 different payments during the month. So what are Court Fees Rating Services, please?
Ms Jennings.
Through you, Mayor. So the CS Legal collects debts on behalf of the city. So all the court fees and their charges are we pay through these 5 tranches.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the warrant of payments? If there are no other questions on the warrants of payments, I go to 4.8, financial activities statement for the period. Any questions on the financial activities statement? If there are no questions on the financial activities statement, I go to the financial hardship collection of rates and service charges. Any questions on that? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just referencing page 290, one of the issues that I have in any policy that we do is referencing the management procedure, and obviously councillors or anyone on council or members of the public cannot see a management procedure. So if we're referencing a management procedure and the city deals with a resident in a certain way, and obviously a councillor inquiries about that, and our administration goes, well, it's a management procedure, it's in the council policy, what mechanism do we have then to be questioning a management procedure which is of an operational nature? So should we actually be spelling out the implementation, that stuff that should be public in the council policy, or should we actually be referencing a management procedure?
Ms Jennings.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just looking for where it is on page 290.
It's just under the implementation section.
Oh, right. Yep. Yeah, thank you. The basis, and we do this with all our policies, is just to be clear that we do have procedures behind all of our policies. So it's more just clarity that's the way we do it. So I can talk to the governance team, because this is a standard that we have right across the organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I only bring up the concern just in terms of us. If we were to be questioned by a ratepayer, we obviously don't have that information in front of us, nor can we obtain it. So for us to reference the management procedure is really dangerous, because we're voting on something, we're voting for a reference to a document which we don't have authority to access. So for me, that causes a concern.
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Free Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Wright's made a valid point. We may amend our template to just refer to perhaps a service unit that's responsible for the implementation, which is probably the assurance that council is seeking to know who is going to implement the policy. The reference to the management procedure can be more of an internal document.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item 4.9? If there are no more questions, we move to item 4.10, which is the review of the accounting policy. Do I have any questions on that item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. I'm just going to go to where I was looking. In the actual policy proper, it talks about the leasing, when we lease property and how to deal with that. You're changing the way we're dealing with that in this policy. If it's a council building, it's already covered as an asset under our assets, but then when there's a lease in place, we're treating that different. But they may not be leasing the building for the whole day. They only may be doing 5 hours every day for 360 days. But I note that we're treating that as not as an asset, but as, I think, as a liability. Is that right?
Councillor Miles, can you tell us what page of the agenda that you're referring to so that we can all find it fairly quickly?
Sorry. Yeah, 300 and... it was the leasing part. It was under the check parts. There was quite a big change.
Here we go. 322. So you're deleting a whole bunch of lines, then you're adopting an Australian standard, and then you're talking about how the city has to assess the contract of the lease.
Thank you, Mr. Pajura.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So leasing standard has changed, meaning mainly we have to treat all our assets. They still remain as assets. But if we lease something else from outside, so as a lessee, then if it is, even though it is on lease, in substance we are using it for our own purpose. So we have to treat it as of our own asset. So that's a change, not the other way around.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no other questions on this item, we go to 4.11, Purchasing Policy Review. This is Mr. Best, isn't it? Okay, any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mayor Aitken. My question is addressed to Ms Jennings. I referred to page 364 of the agenda. That page is one of the pages in respect of the marked up proposed amendments to the policy that's under review. Under the heading 5.1, local economic benefit, the third unnumbered paragraph makes reference to a qualitative weighting in favour of local businesses as defined. And it now will read in red of 10% or greater. Is there any cap on the greater aspect of it, so to speak, or not? Perhaps it might be better to mention a possible percentage range. And that's the first question. Second question.
Can we just do them one at a time, Chris?
Sorry. Thank you.
Ms. Councillor Baker. Mr. Best, would you respond to that question, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through yourself. Yeah, we have set that as a sort of a minimum standard. It certainly can be higher and has been higher than the 10% weighting. We could specify a range if we would prefer that, but it does depend on the specific procurement as to how much we would apply. Yeah.
Supplementary.
Councillor Baker.
So when it says of 10% or greater, no cap mention, what does greater mean? It means more than 10%, but I mean, that's why, well, what I was going to propose is that the city consider increasing the 10% margin. I think you've said historically the margin has been even higher than 10% for local businesses in terms of weighting historically. What a range of, say, 15 to 20%. Have a definite range. Now, just an idea.
Mr. Best.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, it has been higher in some instances. Typically, it's been in the order of 10% as a local benefit weighting through the qualitative criteria.
Can that be increased, please?
Certainly it could be. I guess we're trying to sort of put a range there, I guess, in terms of 10% being the minimum and then seek to increase.
Well, thank you. I do foreshadow amendments at the next ordinary council meeting regarding this question.
Would you like to speak to this as well?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add that we didn't have any actual range there for a while, so we've gradually added in a range for this particular item. And so it was for a while taken into account, but with no particular amount. And now we've added the amount, I think it was the last time, and this time we've just expanded it just a bit more. So.
Okay, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question in regards to this on page 363. I take note that the value for money is an overarching principle governing procurement, but is it actually included in the selection criteria when we do procurement? Because I know the community is very good at pointing out when we overpay for things, but is there a way that we can properly measure this when we do get reports for individual projects?
Mr. Best.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we do apply the value for money principles in terms of both the qualitative criteria that we apply those weightings to and the price criteria that we don't apply a weighting to. So the overall value for money is a combination of those two factors independent of each other. And we also take additional risk factors into consideration as well, such as the performance of the contractor, their financial capacity, and those sort of aspects. So it's an overall consideration, not just based on one particular element.
Thank you, Mr Best. Any more questions? Councillor Wright.
I suppose the point around price, is that something that we can, I guess, join with the other factor that you mentioned before as a joint criteria when we do procurement? So it would be price and, sorry, I forgot the other one that you mentioned. It was price and quality, yeah, that one.
Mr Best.
Yes, that's the actual process that we do go through, is to apply a scoring mechanism around the qualitative criteria, and then there's a separate assessment done of the price, and it's the bringing together of those two independent factors that contributes to the overall value for money decision. So it's not based on just one side, it's based on both coming together.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the chair to Nolene and Ms Jennings, I refer to page 363 of the agenda. Once again, this is the tracked marked up review document. Towards the bottom of the page, there's paragraph 5, which is being changed, the heading's being changed from sustainable procurement to social and sustainable procurement. In the second paragraph under that heading, there's the paragraph which will now read, if the review's endorsed, which I'm sure it will be, which will now read in full. The city is committed to implementing social and sustainable procurement by providing a preference to suppliers that demonstrated, I think it means demonstrates, demonstrated sustainable business practices, including social advancement, commitment to the Commonwealth's Modern Slavery Act where applicable, environmental protection, etc., etc. How does a putative supplier demonstrate that it has sustainable business practices and will comply and commit itself to the Modern Slavery Act? How would a supplier demonstrate that? By having a clause in their quote saying we will comply with this act.
Mr Best, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, we have looked to introduce the reference to the Modern Slavery Act in the policy. It is a legislative requirement. It is a federal government legislative requirement, and it does only apply to organisations that have a significant turnover in terms of revenue. But yeah, I guess it's there as a reference for that, and I hope to try and, I guess, embellish the local supplier network that we deal with that can actually demonstrate they are advancing towards those sort of principles. So it's a statement of that fact.
Thank you. Any other questions? If then, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor, just on that one, just for the the Modern Slavery Act. In fact, I think there was a report released a week or so ago, I think from the Wanneroo Foundation, that suggested that some of this green economy stuff like silicon panel or solar panels are being made by people under slavery conditions. So I'm not sure whether there is a list, like whether the Wanneroo people have made a list up or whether there is already a list, but that would be worth, I think, investigating. If we're going to put it in a policy, we need to know how to act on it.
Mr Best.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I would certainly agree with that comment. That there are organisations that publish such policies within their organisations, and through our tender process, we can ask for evidence of those documents to promote the fact that we're looking to develop that knowledge of the supply chain networks, I guess, is what we're trying to achieve here, and understand how that's tracking back.
Thank you. Ms Jennings.
Yes, Mayor. We also know that a lot of companies that are taking that on board are also publishing it in their annual reports as well. In fact, some areas require that to be published, so there are some other ways to find the information too.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we go to Chief Executive Office, Government and Legal. Go to item 4.12, Annual Delegated Authority Review 2022-23. Did you want to speak to anything, Mr CEO?
No, thank you, Mayor. Happy to take questions on items 4.12, 13 and 14.
Okay, any questions on item 4.12? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the CEO. Page 402, which talks about 1.1.9, control of reserves in certain unvested facilities. I was just wondering, when you're dealing with unvested facilities that are partially within two or more local government districts, is that delegated authority a part unsaid in cooperation with the other local government involved?
Mr. CEO.
For you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question. I would imagine this delegation would not extend to circumstances where it's a shared reserve across two local governments. That would have to be brought back to council. But I might just seek some advice from Director of Planning if you have a different view.
Mr. Dixon.
I share the same view as the CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Councillor Smith, do you have another question? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question to Daniel Sims, the CEO. The recommendation, once again, it notes that we'll ask that the council accepts the review of the city's delegated authority register, etc., as per the Act, and adopts the register, etc. Now, in terms of this review, on the basis that the city will have a new CEO in place in the next couple of months, will the new CEO have to be given fresh delegations in respect of each and every delegation referred to in the attachment to this item or report, or will the existing delegations that our current CEO has, will they simply be assigned or transferred to the new CEO? My understanding is there has to be a fresh series of instruments of delegations. Is that your understanding, Mr. CEO?
Mr. CEO.
For you, Mayor, no. So council is delegating to the position of Chief Executive Officer, not to Mr. Sims in this case. So these delegations will flow through to whichever person holds the position of Chief Executive Officer or, in the past, Acting Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions on item 4.12? We've got no more questions on item 4.12. 4.13, do we have any questions? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Just one question, Mayor, in relation to page 540 of the agenda proper. Item 6, request to repeal the community gardens policy. It mentions that a number of the operational matters can be handled under a management procedure. Could the CEO clarify how a management procedure would support the establishment of a new community garden? Because just from what I've seen on this section of the agenda, I don't believe we have sufficient information to repeal this policy next week.
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will take that on notice and provide some additional information, unless Mrs. Russell can provide the answer now.
Ms. Russell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in terms of the policy, the grounds for actually setting up a new community garden would actually fall under the leasing policy that actually determines all the requirements and the approval process is required to actually set up a garden. So the community gardens policy in its current state doesn't actually go through the permissions to actually set up the garden. That's always been done through the leasing policy. It just provides guidelines around what's required to actually set up a garden, which can now go into community guidelines rather than the policy.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Rowe.
I just may flag an amendment then for next week.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item 4.13? There are no more questions on 4.13. Any questions on item 4.14, the Strategic Risk Register update? If there are no questions on that, I move forward to motions on notice, and I foreshadow a motion on notice for next week's meeting. Do we have any other motions on notice foreshadowed?
Yes, as stated, Mayor, the motion on notice regarding a minor amendment to the purchasing policy, the current review that's underway, will be referred to.
That's an amendment, isn't it, Councillor Baker?
Yep. Well, I have to give notice of the amendment.
Yeah, okay.
As per the usual methodology,
Okay.
the Standing Orders, Local Law 2021.
Okay. My motion on notice is about traffic management on Marmion Avenue with pedestrian access way in two areas of Marmion Avenue. Okay. Any other motions on notice? Okay. Moving forward, there are no late reports to be circulated. We have no public in the auditorium for a public question time. We've done the confidential. The date of item 9, the date of the next meeting is at 6 p.m. on Monday, the 12th of June. And I declare the meeting closed at 8:21 p.m.